Hello, and welcome to the Baton Exchange Podcast, a place for Christian young professionals and college students to join together and learn about life, Christian principles, and career. Join us as we dive into today's episode, and thank you so much for listening.
Well, hey, welcome everybody to the Baton Exchange Podcast. This is one of our first ones, and I'm very much looking forward to our guest, Patrick McBain. But before we get to that, the Baton Exchange Podcast is tied to the Baton Exchange. We're a local ministry in Columbus, Ohio that has had a global reach, and we want to equip Christian 20-somethings to integrate faith, work, and leadership in order to be a redemptive influence in the workplace and culture. And so we've been doing this for almost 15 years. I have a heart for 20-somethings. I just love gathering folks who also love to invest in them. And today, we're going to be talking about social covenants. Social covenants are so important as a young leader to understand how to utilize, how to develop, and how to it's an essential tool for your toolbox, not only at work, but also in relationships at home and with friends. So to help us understand social covenants, I've invited Patrick McBain, also known as Patty, to be a part of this podcast. Patty, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, John. Appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to be with you and your audience associated with the Baton Exchange.
Yeah, well, thanks so much. And we've had you in-person types of situations before at Baton Exchange, teaching about social covenant and lots of other things. And but before we get to that, I just want to give folks just an insight into you. I've known you now for probably at least almost a decade, probably. I'm thinking, I can't remember exactly. Yeah. It's been quite a long time. You've really invested in me a lot. I really appreciate that. And we've done different things over the years. And I just really appreciate your heart for the Lord and your heart for the marketplace and the folks who are there. And anyway, I just really appreciate you and your wife, Leslie, and all that you guys do.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that as well. Thanks for that encouragement. Yeah.
So let's kind of wrestle a little bit with social covenants. So first of all, what is a social covenant? Oh, first of all, let's back up even more.
Yeah.
What's a social covenant? But then, can we think of any covenants, like maybe in the Bible that God has talked about?
Yeah. You know, I'll just sort of frame the social covenant definition and conversation with this statement. Relationships equal conflict.
Oh, my word. I didn't want to hear that.
So any of us at any given time, at any sort of stage in our journey and experience can probably point back to a time where we've experienced some conflict in a relationship.
Absolutely.
You know, and because of that, oftentimes, if we have been raised with the knowledge and the tools and the understanding, we can navigate that conflict pretty well. Mm-hmm. Generally, based on the audiences I get to be around, those but being both Christian or non-Christian, conflict's a big deal. Mm-hmm. It's a big issue. And relationships, I mean, turn your TV on right now, are strained and stressed and pressured. And, you know, now coming out of one of the most unusual times in the history of mankind, a global pandemic, that conflict and that tension are at an all-time high.
You know, we've had to even wrestle with that. I was just thinking about this past year, and at church we had this in our fellowship. We're talking about, what's your word for the last year?
Right.
Mine was grace. You know why? Because just how we handle, even individuals handle the pandemic, was sources of conflict. So I had to learn how to be gracious with people who might think differently than I do about it, and like live in this context of tension all the time. Mm-hmm. And it really, you know, I was in covenant really with folks in our own little church community, and had potential for conflict. But yes, you're so right.
Yeah, it's interesting because mine was patience.
Yeah.
So, you know what they say, anytime we pray for patience, God's not going to give you patience. He's going to give you the opportunity to become patient.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So that being said, John, let me also lay what we call some preliminary definitions in front of your audience. So the first one is in the context of leadership. And that definition sounds like this. If you have influence with at least one person, that makes you a leader. So everybody listening to this podcast is a leader, because everybody has at least one relationship. And the influence you have in that relationship is going to be paramount to whether or not you influence it in a good way or a bad way. We want to prepare you through the tools that are associated with transformational leadership to be a positive influence, to be a life-giving influence, to be a reconciling influence. And so you can't wait for the moment of difficulty to say, I wonder what I'll do here. So you have to be proactive. You have to be intentional. So knowing that you could potentially have a tool in your tool belt that you could bring to a situation anywhere, anytime, really gives you some confidence. At the end of the day, for especially our 20-something listeners, confidence is one of the things that they are looking to build in their, personal, makeup and identity as a leader. So this will play into that as well. The second definition that I think is going to be really important to sort of take an understanding around is our definition of organization. An organization is anywhere where two or more people are in relationship with each other. So now organization becomes a marriage, a family, a church, a team, a government. You fill in the blank, and it can be temporary or it can be long lasting. But at the end of the day, if you're in a relationship for a period of time, that is going to define an organization. Okay. So that's important to sort of lay that foundation when it comes to thinking about a social covenant, because again, at the heart of this, you're looking to positively influence those relationships so that they can flourish.
Okay.
So
we're thinking about other people's flourishing, not just our own, right? Is that what you're saying?
That's right. Yeah. And if we're in the marketplace and we consider ourselves marketplace ministers, you are always thinking of the other, because it connects that servant heart that Jesus asked us to demonstrate. He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind, and love your neighbor as you love yourself.
I just have a little question here, a little question. So you use the word marketplace minister. I just want to pause on that. Just who would those people be? Who are they? Who's a marketplace minister?
Yeah, quite frankly, if you are a Christ follower and you find yourself wondering how to express yourself in the work context by demonstrating your faith, you essentially are a marketplace minister. Now, one of the things that's difficult to do is, so how do I take this flowery language that sometimes I hear on a Sunday morning in a sermon and transfer it into a Monday experience? So these tools have basically taken the truth that's embedded in God's word and put them in simple English so that a common language that doesn't separate or push people away, but actually brings people together, can be shared and then utilized to build that cohesiveness, to build that harmony, to create an opportunity for reconciliation when conflict does arise. Okay. Let me lay another aspect of foundation with this. Our greatest area of frustration in a relationship comes from an unmet, uncommunicated expectation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You're right.
So,
I've learned that in my marriage. I've learned that at work, and other relationships with friends. It's like, I'm so disappointed. Like, I had no idea that's what you were expecting, or
right.
vice versa, So, yeah.
So you'll see how this is connected to the two questions we use in a social covenant in a moment. But one of the things that, helps frame that understanding comes from a man by the name of Elihu Goldratt. Now, Goldratt was a marketplace sort of engineer theorist who took a thing called the theory of constraints, which is a formula to address barriers that are specifically associated with system, process, and procedural barriers, or as the word says, constraints that keep you from being productive. Well, we have added a layer to it because of the human element. Because if you don't evaluate who you are as an individual in the context of breaking a constraint, then the constraint will probably continue. No organization, whether it's a family, a baseball team, a church, a business, can rise above the level of its own leaders.
Right.
So
And the law of the lid of sorts.
the law of the lid, right. So what are you willing to do that others may not be willing to do in order to see if you believe that the culture of your organization, whether that's 2 people or 200 people, if you want to influence that culture, you're going to have to take those proactive steps. And it means that you're not sitting, if you will, on the throne of hierarchy and position, but you're actually coming down from that place and creating a very intentional playing field by asking a simple question. Hey, John, when we're together, how do we want to treat each other?
Right.
That's the question that forms the first level of understanding in a social covenant. When we're together, how do we want to treat each other? Now, I've done this with hundreds of people now over the years, since I've now been a part of transformational leadership and the use of these tools for the better part of 14 years. And because of that opportunity, I've been able to actually sort of pull back the cover on some things that, sort of show up. So invariably, John, when you hear that question, what's the first word that comes to your mind?
With respect.
There you go.
Yeah. If you're asking me that question, I'm gonna be treated with respect. I don't want to be talked down to. I want to be valued. I want people to kind of appreciate what I bring to the table.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what you're doing right now in this moment by putting even these thoughts and expectations, there's our word, on the table, is that we're creating an understanding.
Right.
So back to our author real quick. One of Elihu Goldratt's famous quotes is, "Tell me how you measure me, and I'll tell you how I behave."
Yeah.
If you measure me in an illogical way, do not complain about my illogical behavior.
Yeah.
So hence the need to not only get really, really good. Young people, I'm now talking directly to you and at you. If you do one thing in your early career and then continue to do it throughout your career, I want to encourage you to get really, really good at getting and giving expectations. Without that frustration that I mentioned a moment ago is going to rear its ugly head. And you may never say anything about it. And you may just sort of acquiesce and go along, but internally, you're going to be frustrated.
So on the flip side of that frustration, like what are the benefits, like, of pressing into that and, kind of using a formal or informal social covenant? Like, what are the benefits of that?
Yeah, well, the benefits are if you and I, for instance, establish a social covenant understanding based on how we want to treat each other,
Mm-hmm.
and we both agree to it, then now we actually, the pressure, if you will, of human behavior, which, by the way, it doesn't mean you and I are going to be perfect in our relationship.
Right.
But the pressure associated with navigating it so that we can be healthy and productive is now much clearer.
Mm-hmm.
Pressure starts to dissipate.
Mm-hmm. So
right?
we're going to experience, in some ways, a little less stress. We're going to feel a little more confident. Maybe we're going to be more productive through our relationship.
Yeah.
Okay. I could really get into those kind of benefits.
So that's question number one. And then, quite frankly, question number two is even more significant, which goes like this. Assuming we can agree on how we want to treat each other, John, what are we going to do when one of us fails that agreement or expectation?
It'll only be you, Patrick, that's going to fail, not me, of course.
I guarantee it, John.
Yeah, right.
Right?
My wife could tell you otherwise.
So without that expectation in play, then there's sort of this catch-22. Oh, wait a second. Has this become sort of manipulative? Does this become something that actually creates an awkward imbalance because you are the CEO or you are the supervisor? Or no, because there's an understanding in advance of what question two should look like and the process should look like. Now, even more of that pressure dissipates because we actually have a safe environment. As a leader, as a worker, psychological safety is paramount. And if we don't create that, if you're the leader, you're probably creating an environment that's probably going to be either unproductive or potentially has some pitfalls in it that are going to sort of rear its ugly head at some point in the future.
And even maybe if we're not the leader, like in the workplace, or we don't have that role, would it be true that we can still have that even in one-on-one relationships in our circle of friends, or in our neighborhood, or with the people, the annoying people who are in the apartment above us, or
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, you and I are very different people.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right.
And if we were to, there's all of these unique assessments out there, right?
Right.
And you can sort of pull back the covers on how you show up to most relationships. Mm-hmm. But we like to actually talk about it in the context of thinking of a continuum. Mm-hmm. All right. So imagine a continuum here, John. All right. And on one end of the continuum is someone who is highly relational, where the relationship for them is not only significant, but it's probably one of the most important things. And having that relationship intact and harmonious mm-hmm. is highly important for them to be productive. Mm-hmm. On the other end of the continuum is someone who's highly transactional. Mm-hmm. This is the individual who loves to get things done. They see the task, they process the task, they attempt to execute the task. They are often looking at a list either at night or in the morning, because for them, getting things done is where their internal motivation is expressed.
And they feel drained or stressed if the things on that list aren't checked off.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right. So those two people for instance, are going to have a different definition of respect.
Mm-hmm.
Respect to a transactional person is why isn't everyone else as conscious about time as I am?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mhm. Respect for a relational person is you aren't considering my feelings in this decision right now.
Mm-hmm.
You have no idea, what it's like for me to hear this decision without your consideration of blank, right? So for those two, if you will, ends of the continuum, we actually have a middle ground that we call relational, where someone who is highly relational is making some very deliberate, intentional steps to become relational, and someone who is more transactional is making some very deliberate steps to become more relational, so that they actually build this connection in the middle.
So that really kind of that your approach that you're describing of as you're listening to that person with the question, their answer to your question, how do you want me to work with you? How do you want me to treat you? We have to listen in order to catch. For them, it might be, you do what you say you're going to do. You do it in a timely manner.
Yes.
The other one might be, well, I want to know how you're feeling before I just press ahead, and those kinds of things. So before you press ahead. So that just reminds me of what Christ is called to. That's a very practical example of how do we serve one another.
Yes.
Right. So it may not be easy for me as a task-oriented person to stop, kind of like hit the pause button before I make a decision or before I plow forward and ask the other person, well, what do you think? How's this going to impact you? How do you feel about this?
Right.
Right. So in fact, I'll have to confess, I've taken one of those assessments, like emotional intelligence assessments, and it says, John, you knothead, you need to work in this area of stopping and asking people, because I'm task focused, right?
Yes.
I need to check in with them. How you feeling about this before I just go, boom, do it.
So hence the focus I shared a moment ago on getting better at giving and getting expectations.
Mm-hmm.
When you're relational, you're committed to moving towards the middle, and you're also committed to becoming the type of leader that adapts and understands the playing field is very diverse, right? The diversity inclusion sort of conversation when it comes to, the biblical understanding was happening years ago, decades ago,
Right.
centuries ago, because Jesus actually was very inclusive. He was very inclusive, and he figured out ways to create, if you will, that safety with everyone he was with. Yeah.
Well, Patrick, we only have a few minutes here, and wow, it just feels like we've just scratched the surface. We might have to kind of pick up another time for what you guys call the 6-step apology, or how do we resolve conflict within a social covenant. So I think maybe that might have to be another piece of it.
Sure.
But in this time remaining here, can you again kind of just summarize what are the key, the key elements of a social covenant, and how it can benefit us? And then I would just like to do just a quick little role play,
Absolutely. Yeah.
so people can kind of see it or hear it rather. So
Sure. Absolutely.
key elements, key benefits, and let's role play.
And then an example, I can do one from just last week, a new coaching client. Yeah, I'll share that with you guys. So the essence behind a social covenant is creating an expectation around how we want to treat each other, how we want to be treated, so that we all show up to this very challenging thing called relationships with some clarity. We've, built that safety and trust that allows us to work closer together. And we do it by asking very simple questions like, hey, when we're together, how do we want to treat each other? Question number 2, assuming we can all agree on how we want to treat each other, what should we do when one of us fails the agreement? For that, there are some very simple steps. Go one-on-one. And again, if we're going to go one-on-one, it isn't to out someone, it isn't to shame them, it isn't to expose them. It is actually to reconcile and work the relationship. Okay? Because relationships equal conflict. They're challenging, right? Our intent as Christ followers is as ministers of reconciliation. We lead the way.
Right.
And we literally become appealing in this fashion, as it says in the Corinthians, scriptures that talk about this. So with this in mind, John, oftentimes though, a one-on-one can feel pretty challenging. So the way we go is as important as going. And so we actually talk about going in humility. And if you go in humility, basically what you're saying is, and you've reflected on the fact that I may be part of the problem here.
Yeah.
The issue may be my perception. There may have been zero intent on what I thought was done by that other person. So going in humility means I'm going to consider the role I played as much as trying to actually talk through what someone may or may not have done to me. Number two in this step is to go in love or care, which means I care more about you than I do about being right. And that's not necessarily an easy posture to have, but it's an essential one to have. The third one is to go with pre-forgiveness. Okay. So imagine having released that person from what they did before you even had a conversation with them. Knowing that, as far as you're concerned, they're free and forgiven. Now let's figure out what just happened between us. No strings attached. That's that unique thing that Jesus demonstrated. That's called unconditional love and unconditional forgiveness. There's nothing you can do that will ever change that with him and with God and us. It's there on the table.
Right.
There's nothing we can do to get a higher level of love. There's nothing we can do to get a higher level of forgiveness. The complete unconditional love and forgiveness that God has for us is on the table. He doesn't take it back. Pretty powerful.
Yeah.
So imagine having that in your attitude and posture. And then the fourth one is to go with 100% truth. Now, that one's challenging as well. And the reason why that's challenging is because if I go to you and I want to work this out, I need to be as transparent, authentic, and fully sort of divulging as possible about what I think took place. Now, just because you go with 100% of the truth doesn't mean you have all of the facts.
Right.
Invariably, when we have these reconciling encounters to work things out and to get back to this place of respect and love and care and accountability and all the other things that are woven into how we want to treat each other, invariably, right, we've got to work through some of the things that are part of our imperfection. You're imperfect. I'm imperfect.
Right.
And our relationship is imperfect. Let's create an environment that allows it, again, to flourish. Right? And again, sometimes an apology is necessary, and maybe we'll work that into a separate thing. Let me share a scenario that just happened just last week.
Sure.
So I have two organizations. One's a nonprofit, which you're very familiar with, and the other is a consulting coaching practice. And I work with Fortune 500 companies and leaders here and around the world. So I just started a brand new executive coaching contract with a gentleman from Germany last week.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. These are all very fun and exciting, and we take a really cool journey together, and create a real unique pathway for professional and personal success using these same tools.
Mhm.
We were in our opening conversation, and I said to my new client, we'll call him John.
Okay, let's do that.
All right. And I said, so John, we're going to spend probably 6 months together in this, coaching program. Before we get too far down the road, can I ask you a question? And he said, yeah, sure. I said, how do you want me to treat you during this process, during this time together?
Mhm.
John, he gave me some very specific and clear things that he wanted from me.
Were you taking notes?
I took notes, I wrote them down, and when he was done sharing them, I said, thank you so much.
Well, how many people actually hear that question from someone else at the beginning, right?
Oftentimes it's rare.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, and I'll share what he said in sort of reflection of what I did with him in this way. So I asked him a second question. I said, would you be willing to extend that same treatment to me?
Mhm.
He said, absolutely. I said, that's wonderful. I said, that agreement for you and I is going to go a long way in creating that ability to talk freely, openly, and have a much different experience
Mhm.
as we continue down this engagement.
Mhm.
So I said, look, I'm a flawed individual, so I want you to have a green light to come to me, anytime there's anything that you feel that represents me breaking that expectation or falling short of it.
Mhm.
Would you please do that for me? He said, absolutely. I said, is it all right if I do the same for you? He said, please.
Mhm.
We have now created in less than 2 minutes a social covenant,
Mhm.
now written into our expectation with each other.
Mhm.
When I was done, I said, so John, said, what you just experienced is a tool that is embedded in transformational leadership called the social covenant.
Mhm.
He goes, I know, I found it fascinating the way you just had this conversation with me.
Right. Right.
He said, and now my brain is just sort of going in a number of different places because I am now thinking about the relationships I need to do this same conversation with.
Mhm. Mhm.
I
Mhm.
said, good
There
for
you
you. First coaching session in the book.
go. So Patty, when is an appropriate time? You're speaking. I just got my first job out of college. Maybe I'm out, a couple of years, whatever, or starting a new job, getting kind of familiar. When is it appropriate for me to kind of initiate that kind of conversation? And when should I kind of, you know, maybe not, or I don't like what kind of guide me here. Help me.
Yeah. Well, if you're not in a position of leadership or where you have jurisdiction or some kind of authority, whether it's as a team lead or something, it can be awkward to just sort of say, hey, I think we should have a social covenant,
Mhm.
because everyone else is going to be like, who gave you the keys to the kingdom? So tread lightly, but keep it in your back pocket as you entertain conversations with leadership. And that would be positional leadership, whether it is a team leader, a supervisor, or your boss. These are times where you may be able to ask questions that allow you to say, hey, can I share some prior learning that really helped us? Especially if your intent is to improve the team, the situation, or something within the context of that organization that you're involved in. Otherwise, there may be a feeling that you're stepping on toes. And so always sort of create that bridge that says, is there anything that has been done or anything that we might think about doing that could eliminate some of the gossip that's taking place right now? You know, and so that for you as a worker, you know, to actually bring that to the attention of someone in authority or someone in, you know, power, allows them to go, I didn't even know we had a problem with gossip. You know.
Very good. Okay, so it's probably always good to like ask what's expected of you.
Yes.
Don't do it too often, or else you're like, well, they're like, why did I hire this person? But it's like it's good to kind of know what's expected of us and ask those questions. But it sounds like what you're saying is we also need to be a little careful. We have to kind of read the context and not like suddenly kind of just propose this. Well, good. This is what I expect of you too, boss. You know,
Yeah,
we have to make sure there are other ways that we can kind of maybe approach that. But first off, we do need to understand what are they expecting of us, not just our professional or the skill sets, but really our attitudes. And that'll kind of come to the top. The character stuff will end up floating to the top a whole lot more than the skill sets will usually.
Yeah.
All right. So, wow. So this has been great, Patrick. I really appreciate you sharing this and helping us learn a little bit more about social covenants and how to have those kind of conversations and how we can benefit from them. How can let's say we have some we have 20 somethings listening, but let's say we have some leaders here that they have a team or maybe their own company. How can they learn more about what you do and maybe reach out to help you walk them through this process more?
Thanks. Thanks, John. So the content was developed by a man named Ford Taylor. Ford is a business guru, leadership speaker. I met him 15, 16 years ago and went through the training. He is the one who developed this training. And now I'm not only on his international team, but I utilize TL as the primary deliverable with the leaders and the teams that invite me in. So anyhow, transformlead.com is where you can find specific information about the proprietary training called Transformational Leadership, TL. My websites, I have a nonprofit that in part we give the training away to emerging leaders in under-resourced countries around the world, as well as here in the US. And so we're conducting trainings all the time through there.
And I know that we've benefited as a nonprofit working exclusively with, like with 20 somethings, where we've benefited from you coming in and kind of helping our young adults, emerging leaders kind of learn about these principles that we're sharing in this podcast today. So,
right. And then I have my consulting, coaching, leadership practice site that's called Life Needs Leadership. That, again, it allows me to at least let individuals that are just in the marketplace in that context know about what I do and how I do it and everything. So, but I'm on LinkedIn and I'm easy to find.
Good. Well, again, thanks so much, Patrick. I really appreciate you sharing with us today.
Yeah, thanks again for the invitation, John. Appreciate it.
Yep. And folks can learn more, hear this podcast, and over the course of 2022, additional podcasts with the Baton Exchange podcast at Podbean, or you can go to our website, our organization's website, thebatonexchange.org, where our goal again is to equip and help you get ready to receive that leadership baton as future influencers for Christ in the global workplace. Thanks so much. Ciao.
Thanks again for listening to the Baton Exchange podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to share it with a friend and watch out for future episodes.